There was a big traffic jam of cars with a variety of music coming out of their windows, mostly pop music. In one of these cars there was a husky dog sitting on the front seat, which could talk. Next to her stopped a car in which sat a girl. The dog picked up his glasses and almost dropped them when he saw her. The girl sat and looked straight in front of her, unsuspecting. As the dog scrutinized the girl, he howled in admiration of her appearance. Leaning out of the window, the dog called out to the girl. When he was noticed, the dog asked the girl to give him her phone number. But no sooner had he finished speaking than the car sped off and he drove off. The girl looked perplexed at the empty place and thought whether the lady had shown or the husky was really talking. Meanwhile, the husky shouted to his master, "Or he is so driven, he wants to cut off his head, especially he has already seen such a chick there." But the guy sitting next to him pushed him with his hand, thus silencing him. Then he threateningly told him that if he speaks humanly to strangers again, he will make him bald. Upon hearing this, the husky pouted and their house truck continued onward. He decided to introduce himself and said his name was Ivan. He was a very talented husky and had demon blood in his veins. The guy who just punched him in the face works full-time as a driver, also just helping him or something, and his name is Uni, and he's a regular jerk. They drove until the evening until they entered a new town that was already colored by night lights, and they decided to stop. Uni got out of the car together with the dog. One of the first things they always did in a new city, besides checking out the local beauties, was to try the local delicacies. And since they had come to Shin City, they especially couldn't miss the delicatessen street. They walked along the streets, Uni and his husky on a leash, taking in the sights and inhaling the flavor of the local food. The husky wiggled his nose delightedly at the sensation of the mind-blowing smell of the food. At one place, they found rice in chicken breast with mushrooms. In another place, a shiny young pigeon was cooked. And in a third place, a stewed citsania. The husky intended to try all these delicacies. However, his owner prevented him from doing so by holding him by the leash. Against the husky's wishes, he was bought a burger for dinner. The husky looked at it like it was dog poop. Then turned to his owner and asked if he was messing with him. After all, there is a lot of Chinese food: fragrant lamb, steamed bamboo, steamed roast duck, roast chicken, roast goose, salted pork, salted duck, soy sauce stewed chicken, dried meat, and so on. It's their first time in Shin City, after all, and he's going to get off on some burger. The husky got furious and declared that he wouldn't just leave it like that. Uni was actually a rather boring person who had no money or house, and he was also a bit wordy and insensitive. They were walking down a dark alley, Uni chewing on a hamburger and the husky following him on his leash. The houses around them were not particularly populated, and their footsteps echoed off the sidewalk. Ivan stopped and sniffed, for he smelled something unusual. Although his redneck master hardly realized it. Just then, Uni heard two voices, a male and a female, coming from a door ajar not far from them. It was a guy in ripped jeans and a girl in a sweatshirt and cap. They were going to stop by the deli tomorrow. The guy had heard that the seafood there was delicious, and the woman's voice told him that whatever he said would be fine. Suddenly the sky in front of them turned pink. They stood and looked at it in surprise, not understanding what was happening. And from this pink haze, a huge demonic mushroom materialized in front of them. They stood and looked at each other for a while in silence. And it lasted until the guy asked why he was looking at them and keeping silent. The mushroom continued to remain silent and look unkindly at them. When the guy repeated his question and demanded an answer. But the girl pulled him about to leave and said that it seemed to be just some crazy person. Mushroom suddenly raised his voice and said a phrase, "straight parting." The guy irritatedly asked what he said. And the mushroom repeated the phrase "straight edge." Then the guy shouted what he was doing here at night, who or what he was, and why he was pretending to be a mushroom. Then the mushroom rushed at him and attacked him. Seeing this, the girl realized with fear that it was time to run. The guy was lying on the ground and she had just turned to run when the monster asked her if she had a straight brow too. Maybe she wanted to change her hair, he added. The girl replied that she didn't. The mushroom thrust at her and asked her if she was sure she didn't want to change her hair. The girl fell down in front of him and asked him not to kill her. She lay there with her arms outstretched and waited obediently for her fate, while the monster continued to advance on her and had his hand over her. When Wuzai and his husky monster appeared behind the mushroom's back, he declared to the mushroom that this girl was his. The mushroom in turn said irritably that he was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. But the husky told him not to touch the girl, or else don't blame them that they didn't warn him of the consequences. They're masters who specialize in killing bad demons like him, and if he doesn't know what's best, he should give up. With those words, Ivan rushed to attack the mushroom monster. But the mushroom quickly managed to repel the attack. He dispatched the husky and mockingly asked if the demon-slaying masters were so weak. Then the husky objected that the masters he was talking about were not him at all. Before the mushroom could even turn around, he was attacked by Wuzai. The guy jumped at him and gave him a good punch. While the guy was dealing with the monster, Ivan was recovering from the mushroom's attack. When his master had dealt with the monster, he walked over to the girl lying on the ground. After looking at her, he realized that she had been traumatized pretty badly and he would have to help her. He leaned over to her with the intention of helping her. A mushroom came to life behind them and said that they didn't seem to realize the seriousness of the situation. He is the mushroom monster, born in the dark corners of the delicatessen street where no one ever looks. A few decades ago, there was a cute little girl who used to walk here all the time and loved to eat the food here. Every time when she passed here, she threw away the garbage. So it appeared on this fertile land, and the little girl kept feeding it with all kinds of garbage, half-drunk drinks, leftover fruits and vegetables and so on, while nourishing it with her love. Finally the mushroom grew big and was able to cultivate to become a demon. Well, just as he was about to confess his feelings to the girl, he saw that she was being hugged by a man with a straight gap. Even more outrageous was the fact that this man with a straight parting simply played with her feelings. In the end, he simply traded her for another woman, leaving her with the final message that he was just toying with her and that was it. The girl cried and said she was heartbroken. Since then no one has seen her since she committed suicide because of that dude with the straight parting. Mushroom finished his story. And then he started to blame it all on the straight edge, the hated straight edge. Wuzai and Ivan listened to his story and looked at him with a sense of confusion and longing. Mushroom continued and said that all these years after that, all the straight partings had been grabbed by him here. His love died like this, so all these straight aisles must die with her. He will not let anyone mess with his mind. Since he considers himself the king of mushrooms and the most important. Wuzai interrupted the monster and asked that since he has been here for decades, he should therefore be familiar with the area. The mushroom replied that it actually didn't take that long, just a bit of bragging. Then the boy asked him if he had seen the 5 flavors. The monster replied that he heard the old man had fallen in love with Auntie Zhang's 5th sister. And then he got angry and asked what kind of questions are these even from a person who just stepped on his head. He thinks he can fool him with this, the mushroom roared. To this, Wuzai countered that he was referring to the 5 flavors, not the 5th sister. Ivan listened to this and stood there with his paw on his muzzle. The monster, meanwhile, started up again and asked how dare he beat him. Let him open his eyes and look closely. Before him stood the evil great king of the mushrooms, who had already devoured countless quantities of rotting food and garbage. He is the king of the mushrooms. 5th sister or 6th sister, what the hell difference does it make? The monster continued to resent him. After listening to all this, the guy realized that he didn't know anything about what he wanted either. At this, the mushroom scolded him again, but that was the last thing he did in his life. Wuzai was sitting in a cafe when he was served a fried mushroom. Serving it, the waitress asked the guy where he got such a huge mushroom. But she was interrupted by a husky who was looking at her breasts and said that her mushrooms weren't bad either. The girl turned around and asked in surprise if the husky had really just said something or if she had imagined it. The husky just brushed it off and meowed. After this incident, they went back to the car and along with their mushroom meal. Husky decided to introduce himself again and stated that actually the protagonist of this story is actually a guy named UNI, who is actually a peerless man in general, but there was an incident with humanity and so he needs to find 5 flavors to bring everything back. He's a man who specifically means what he says, and this Husky genius should follow him for several reasons. Husky has been constantly eyeing women, and UNI has been trying to lay siege to him and won't let him do anything stupid. This is where their story of a redneck and a beautiful talented dog working together to destroy demons begins. On the table was a variety of food, several types of sausage, garlic, lettuce leaves, bitter peppers, and pita bread. A man stood near this food and was about to cook something. He thought that food was a deep and multifaceted work of art. He started to cut the food with a knife, not going to cook a dish of Sichuan cuisine. He was preparing a specialty dish, spicy, fresh, tender and hot. And at least it was no worse than something fried, dried, boiled, stewed and so on. Besides, it could be prepared in more than 20 ways. The man was sure that the one who wanted to become a master of such a complex cooking must first become a master of his generation, as an ordinary person takes at least 20 years to do it. Just then, the door to the kitchen opened and a little girl named Shangan Shizai walked in. Her father, the impartial cook Shangan Ufa, stood with all the other children and his wife in front of the dish he had prepared and said that it took their father 16 years to become a master. The children and wife hugged him and said they had a wonderful husband and father. Shangan Shizai, who was standing a little farther away from them, looked at them and said she also wanted to learn how to cook. Everyone looked at her perplexed at first, and afterward the children laughed. Her father patted her on the head and said that the kitchen was no place for a girl. Besides, he added, until she is in the kitchen, she won't know the ins and outs of cooking. It's not easy. And he doesn't just mean fire and knife skills, but also intuition, the ability to judge other people's tastes and the ability to learn. It's a very difficult challenge, in which physical endurance is also important. It's something that only men can do. And the father finished his tirade, already in slightly raised tones, standing back to her. The daughter saw that he had a spatula in his hands and carefully took it out of her father's hands. The cook stood as if nothing had happened. He seemed not to notice anything, and the girl rushed to the stove. She turned on the gas and began to stir the dish her father had prepared. Then she put it back on the table. Her father saw this and hummed thoughtfully, looking at the dish. Then he said that she had learned a lot from watching him cook and picked up one of the ingredients of the dish with his chopsticks. After that he tasted it and said that in fact in cooking the taste is important. The appearance may be good, but the main thing is the taste. After that he tasted the dish and almost went crazy. His wife rushed to save him, but he didn't need it. He was absolutely delighted and said it was just great. He was literally soaking wet with pleasure. He felt like he was in a paradise full of flowers. A few years later, they had their own cafe. And Shangan Shizai, already at the age of 18, received the highest award in the world of chefs. Her whole family was present at the award ceremony and of course her father, who was crying with happiness. And the girl started to pack her things and especially her cooking tools. She decided, in order to surpass herself and create the world's first book of culinary genius, she should start traveling around China. But the family was not thrilled with her idea, and when she left, they asked her what they would eat without her, and her father even asked her to tell the recipe of one special chicken that she cooked for them. But the girl did not listen to them and went in search of the most valuable ingredients. Meanwhile, our heroes, boyfriend UNI and demon husky Ivan, were once again sitting in the car and arguing. This time Ivan was not satisfied with the fact that his partner is very unreliable and in what hole he brought them again, because he told him to go in a completely different direction to the east, but he drove to the west. The guy was almost plugging his ears from that much, and the husky kept yelling that he had ruined his date. Besides, he's a dog after all, who doesn't understand the road for good reason, and he's a driver, should know it. They'd probably lost a lot of money they could have made winding up in circles. And now they're left not only without an order, but without dinner and can't even afford to let you pay for gas. How unlucky for him. The husky didn't calm down. Before the dog could finish, Eunice's phone beeped that there was a new order. Their passenger was 1 kilometer away from them at Baekwan Square. Yunai was excited that dinner would be waiting for them soon, while Ivan began to worry that they wouldn't run into a worse problem. Before he could finish his thought, a man suddenly appeared in front of their car. Yunai tried to brake, but it was too late. The person hit their windshield and fell down. Yunai and Ivan were in a stupor and watched in horror. But the man who was hit by the car was fine and grumbled, lying on the ground, that how could you drive so carelessly? Husky yelled at him that he jumped in front of the car on purpose and he wouldn't even rule out the man demanding compensation from them. Just then, 2 people, a child and a woman, rushed to the man from the bushes, and they were yelling "Dad" and "Husband," obviously addressing the injured man. They ran up to him and started asking if he was okay and said they saw him get hit. The woman then turned to Yunai and Ivan and menacingly asked them how they drove so fast that they even hit her husband. Looking at all of this, Yunai got out of the car and uttered that they were in their way. But the man wasn't going to just give up and yelled that he owed him 50,000 to pay for his treatment. He could take the money in cash, or he could take it on a card. Otherwise, they will call a mob here. In response to this, Yunai only laughed and dragged the man by the arm, who frightenedly asked the guy what he wanted to do. But the guy didn't answer and kept pulling him while the man desperately shouted that he had many brothers here and he shouldn't refuse the offer or he wouldn't spare him. Yunai shoved the man as far away as possible and returned to the car as if nothing had happened. The guy was just leaving when the man's family told him that he was a good man and they wished him well. The husky man only told Yunai that following him would never be good luck for him. Eunice's truck reached his client's chosen destination and stopped at Baekwan Square near a girl who was waiting for her transportation. Wuzai walked over to the truck, opened the door, and got in. After sitting down next to Yunai, she took the husky in her arms and started stroking him. Naturally, Ivan melted from such attention. The girl explained that the estuary bordered the Baekwan City wharf on the south shore, where the freshest seafood was brought in every night. Therefore, she made the decision to go there to taste such food. Although the person she boarded the truck with is heading to the northeast, so she's worried that the last batch of food won't be unloaded in time, the girl added sadly. Yunai shrugged and agreed with her. To this, the girl asked why they weren't following the navigator's directions. The guy looked at her in surprise and asked what a navigator was. When the moon had already risen over the city and the streetlights were lit, they reached their destination and arrived where they needed to go. Yunai announced that they had arrived, and the girl got out of the car, and judging by the busyness around them, things were going pretty well. Before she left, she petted the husky and told him that next time he should remember to use the navigator so that he wouldn't go to the wrong place again. Ivan looked at the girl with undisguised delight and gave her a glance. When they were alone, he asked Yunai how much money he had earned from such a long trip. Husky dreamed of going to a seafood restaurant and suggested Yunai to do it, as he had heard that oysters were very famous here. He dreamed about how soft and tender the oysters would make him feel, like a date. Before he could finish his thought, he was already sitting on the step in front of the cafe with a burger in front of him. The husky bull is absolutely completely frustrated. 2 strange-looking types stopped near them and were discussing the sea fish cooked here and how unpalatable it was, not like the seafood at the old Hay Air Hotel, one of them said dreamily. The other guy said to put up with it since the hotel had now turned into the Devil's Coast. Hearing this, Yunai offered to take Ivan to take him there. Husky only snorted at this, that this place had long since turned into a wasteland and therefore, going to the shithole at night wasn't the best idea. They looked at each other in surprise. After all, they had dropped Wuzai off just outside that place. Well then, it looked pretty lively and intact. But in reality, it was abandoned and ransacked. Meanwhile, Wuzai was sitting in that devilish place waiting for her dish to be served. The owner of the place approached her and placed an entire plate of sea delicacies in front of her. He stood eagerly behind her waiting for her to taste the food. The girl picked up 1 shrimp with her Japanese chopsticks, but was in no hurry to send it into her mouth. The owner was literally looking at her like a mesmerized man, not mentally pushing her to eat faster. He knew that once the girl tasted this dish, she would stay here forever. And those guys near Uni and Ivan, when they approached them with a question about Devil's Coast, realized that they weren't from around here. The guy and the husky asked them to tell what happened on the beach. The guys started to tell that the Hey Air Hotel used to be one of the most popular seafood hotels in the area. Every night it was full of people. Many tourists came there to taste the local seafood. But the happiness didn't last long here, and just a few years ago, there was a massive fire there. One of the survivors in the hotel said that he saw a terrible ghost and went crazy. In a mysterious tone, spoke a new acquaintance. Therefore, later on, rumors of missing tourists and one about people seeing ghosts started to appear from time to time. But one important person chose to hide this information, but he himself disappeared soon after. Uni and Ivan listened to their story with great attention. And the guy went on and said that the hotel also became more and more gloomy, to the point that all that was left of it was a rotting building that was destroyed by fire. And the other guy replied that later someone said that they saw the hotel lit up late at night, and such news made everyone feel creepy, but they think it's just a rumor and nothing more. Uni heard this and thought hard. After picking up the dog, he said that they should go. He realized that this time, the man was using illusions. Ivan also realized that it seemed like that girl was a bit unlucky this time. But luckily Chisai was in no hurry to taste the bivalve. She looked at the food carefully and sniffed at it. Wai turned to the owner and said that she had traveled such a long way to taste the freshest seafood, but these bivalves, which they served her, it seems they were all dead already. The owner stopped, turned around to not ask what she said. Whereupon he began to take great umbrage at the fact that she was implying as if they were using dead clams to scam customers. After which he asked if she had tasted them. Chisai didn't answer anything, she just continued to sit at the table. Suddenly looking around, she realized that she was sitting in a ruined building at an old table with a dirty and torn tablecloth. And the demon behind her back kept asking if she had tasted his dish. The girl realized that she was facing an evil spirit and answered him that no, she hadn't tried it yet. Then the demon told her that if she had not tasted the food, then why did she think that the clams were dead? They do not like to be slandered. The sea monster's second brother spoke to her. And then came the sea monster's older brother and the sea monster's third brother. When the girl decided to pretend to be blind and said that she had a heightened sense of smell due to her blindness since childhood. In addition, she had recently contracted a terrible and deadly infection, which was now in the advanced stage, and she had come here in the evening just to eat some of that legendary delicious seafood. The brothers pondered her words. And Chisai was frantically thinking about how to get out of here. They had to find a way by all means. Uni and Ivan reached their destination in record time. They stopped outside a hotel that looked ruined now. Husky put on his goggles and prepared to help his master in destroying the demons. He just felt genuinely sorry for this beautiful gentle girl who could become lunch for the demons. Meanwhile, Chisai was giving a lecture on the health benefits of seafood. The first thing that was important was to keep the seafood fresh in flavor, so it was imperative to use the freshest seafood that had just been brought from the sea. The brothers listened to her and at the same time worried whether the girl's infection could be transmitted to them, because they were vulnerable sea creatures. The girl, meanwhile, was telling them that garlic was the best partner for the food. She was telling the recipe and wondering how she could find a way to distract these monsters and slowly lick them. Suddenly, the door of the place stumbled open and Uni and Ivan walked in, saying that it was time to welcome the new guests. The monsters were surprised and dumbfounded. And Iwan expressed his joy that the girl was fine. Chisai looked at them with gratitude and a kind of joy. And the sea monsters marveled at the fact that they probably knew each other. The girl didn't recognize them at first, but then she was surprised that the dog said hello to her. She thought that she had encountered something incredible today. The second brother of the sea monster said that they were the first to attract the girl to them. And Ivan indignantly objected that they are like these three brothers. They are demons, and they are masters of demon annihilation. In response, the masters laughed and said that it looked very cheesy. Besides, they are demon extermination masters, Big Brother added. While Wuzai and Ivan stood there pondering the information they received, Wuzai decided to seize the moment and run away. That's when the brothers realized that she wasn't blind, she just lied to them. And Wuzai replied that she came here simply because she wanted to create the cooking genius book, so she had no desire to participate in their war. To this the owner roared that since they have entered their territory, but none of them will leave alive today. Ivan replied, so Wuzai, don't worry, they know their business well. He soared up and rushed into the attack. But then the second shrunk brother, Maine, got in his way and asked the husky if he hadn't heard them, this was their domain. To this the husky condescendingly replied that it looked like the little sea monster had gone on a rampage. When one of the brothers lunged at the husky, it only laughed that such an obvious attack wouldn't scare him. The husky threw himself at the monster in response, while reassuring Wuzai not to worry, he wouldn't harm her. And the girl only shook her head and said that he looked like a monster too. Despite the attack being prepared, the monster wasn't going to give up just like that. It was the first one that was going to strike Wuzai. The monster started to spit something at the guy, but he easily dodged it. After that, the monster used its slippery tail, but the guy easily caught it too, and squeezed it in his hand, after which some nasty stuff spurted out. The monster looked at this and concluded that this guy seemed to be a kung fu master. Meanwhile, Wuzai was retreating from the attack. The monster brothers replied that he had also trained for 20 years with videos and had defeated many people with just one punch. Not to mention that their elder brother could control everything with illusions. They encouraged the monster in every way possible and asked him what he was afraid of. The monster responded by letting out his 9 tails and said that he was a martial artist, so he wasn't afraid of anything. His brothers echoed him and said that their third brother's kung fu was unrivaled. Wuzai should die today. However, Wuzai was not even going to just give up and prepared to repel the blow. The monsters didn't wait long and attacked the guy, and the guy in turn punched him back. His blow was so strong that he just flew off to the side and fell to the ground. He lay there for a while without moving, until his brothers rushed to him, reading how he was going to die like that. The second brother started demanding the older brother to use his illusions and abilities to finish off their enemies. The older brother slowly came to his senses and asked what they were saying about garlic supposedly being the best partner for seafood. The second brother irritably replied that he was taking too long to react to events. They had already gotten to the part when their third brother was dead. Then the older brother asked if he had been eaten, for he was the first to want to taste it, as he had been beaten to it. But the middle brother replied that he had not been eaten. Meanwhile, Wuzai and Ivan suddenly felt an unbearable fever. They didn't understand what was happening and why they suddenly felt so hot. And the older brother yelled at the top of his voice, how dare they eat his brother. Suddenly, Wuzai saw expensive seafood near her and wondered how it had appeared there. And Ivan found himself surrounded by all sorts of beautiful girls. Second brother and Wuzai realized that this was Big Brother's super illusion of a happy paradise. The elder brother was going to immerse all the enemies into their most lustful desires so that they would completely lose control. And after the second brother turned to look at Wuzai and realized that he didn't react in any way, he was surprised and asked if he didn't have anything happy. Wuzai still remembered very well how his older brother had attacked him, accusing him of eating their 3 brothers. So he replied that vile people like them should be turned into food and exterminated. But then the older brother of the sea monster, the Prince of Oysters, appeared before him and said that he had messed with the wrong person. He was the owner of these waters. Then he pointed to Wuzai and Ivan, who were paralyzed by their own illusions, and said that there was no one left who could save him. He must die with them for the sake of his 3 brothers. Wuzai, looking at this, dropped the burger he had been holding in his hands the whole time. This made him angry and accused the monster of ruining his dinner. The monster heard this and stepped on his burger on purpose and laughed. After that, the monster asked him to come over and eat it. Wuzai punched him so hard that he flew upwards. The monster lost his bearings and started wailing. The monster didn't seem to understand what had happened and why the guy had such great strength. And UNI seemed to do nothing, but the monster was defeated. After the guy's attack, only a clam-like shell remained of the monster. After the monster died, UNI and Ivan came to their senses. The girl asked what was even going on here. The second brother knelt down beside his older brother's body. However, he was not going to grieve at all. On the contrary, he laughed and rejoiced at the absence of his brothers, who had stood in his way all the time. For his older brother had suppressed his powers with his cursed illusion, and he was to be the prince of these waters. The other brother was a lobster, the legendary king of the shrimp. And now he and his weapons were free. The pollutants from the ocean continued to enter his body, and if Mr. Owen didn't help him become a demon, he would perish in the sea like all the others. Hearing Aowen's name, UNI wondered who he was. And the demon explained that when he turned into a monster, he set his goal to take over the human land, let the humans live in the ocean and feel their pain too. Shizai and UNI listened to him without much enthusiasm. And the monster showed his claw, which was called Demonic Destroyer, which meant from the name as if God could kill God and devil could kill devil, could easily pierce through everything. He used it to chop up more than 30 cruise ships. The monster finished his story. UNI touched his claw thoughtfully and asked if he knew anything about the 5 flavors. The demon replied that he had only heard of 6 flavors of herbal pill and pounced on the guy with an attack. UNI calmly dodged the blow and retaliated in turn. As a consequence, he shattered and completely destroyed the demonic annihilator at the lobster's side. The lobster looked at his hand in horror and asked what kind of magic weapon he had in his hand. UNI did indeed have something like a sharpened blade on his hand. It turned out to be a magical heavenly weapon called the Demon Suppression Blade. Now the demon realized that from the very beginning, the guy had borrowed his power, but he also said that he would not be afraid of him. Unlike his 2 idiot brothers, he considered himself omnipotent. UNI calmly reacted to such a loud statement. Meanwhile, Monster continued to brag and said that his strongest defense was the spiky dragon armor, which even a missile couldn't penetrate, and it not only protected him from all attacks, but also reflected the damage. Therefore, the monster condescendingly suggested that the guy should not waste his strength, but rather surrender immediately, since even his demon suppression blade wouldn't be able to penetrate his armor. But despite this, UNI was not going to give up. He rushed back to attack the monster, surprising it greatly. The lobster roared that he would rather run away than attack. He shouldn't get too close to him. The monster tried to stop the guy. But UNI was already very close and gave the lobster a staggering attack, burning it in flames. In this way, he defeated all 3 delicacy brothers, the oyster, the lobster, and the clam. When it was finally over, Ivan told Shizai that she could always feel safe with them. Shizai condescendingly thanked her. And UNI walked leisurely to the car and called everyone to follow him. Husky asked him why he was using the demon suppressor blade again, since he needed to preserve his strength. Shizai realized only one thing from what was happening, that this man was very strong. After that, she asked her new acquaintances if they had dinner tonight and stated that she had one great idea. With the help of her knives, which the girl never parted with, she was able to make them a wonderful dinner. Shizai made a lovely noodle dish with gravy. Husky watched with delight and told Shizai that she was not only beautiful and smart, but also a great cook. And the girl explained that with the limited ingredients she had brought with her, she had only managed to cook such a thing. Steamed lobster with finely chopped garlic. Gutchdak sashimi, and it had to be fresh. And for dessert was a frozen deep-sea oyster, the most widely known seafood in these parts. The girl proudly presented her dishes and invited her acquaintances to try them, so this was the premier time she used demons as an ingredient. Shizai was the first to take charge and tried one of the dishes. Husky also tasted the oyster and stated that it tasted incredible. It was much better than the illusion he had been in. Shizai also noticed that the taste of the food was really different and wondered if there was really something special about demon meat. Husky rushed over to UNI, shaking him and stating that he absolutely had to try this. UNI replied that he should eat and get ready. They'll run out of gas if they don't pick up their order. Ivan got angry that he doesn't want to try the dish and inhaled it forcibly. Wuzai, seeing that he tasted it, asked if it tasted good to him. Uni's eyes almost popped out of his orbits from surprise when he tasted the dish. Wuzai was somewhat discouraged by this reaction. And UNI stated that the food had a salty taste and tears flowed from his eyes. He asked why her food had such a flavor. The girl shrugged her shoulders and replied that she added soy sauce to it and that's why the food is naturally salty. And the husky was surprised that the guy's sense of taste had returned. The next day, the three of them were riding in their truck. Wuzai chattered away and asked the boys if they really lived like that, killing demons along the way, and she wondered how many demons they met each day. She was curious about all this since she had tasted demon meat yesterday and it was amazing. It was the exact ingredient she was looking for. So from now on, she decided to travel with them and create the world's first demon cookbook. UNI was about to object something. However, the girl didn't even let him say a word, cutting him off that she wouldn't tolerate any objections. And after learning that they had no money for food and gasoline, she said that they would split the cost of fuel in half and demanded to go on their way. A beggarly old man sat in the street against the wall and begged for alms. An obviously not poor woman passed by him and he told her that he had not eaten for days. But the woman threw away his coin bowl with the toe of her shoe and said she didn't care that he hadn't eaten in days. To this, the old man venomously said that he really hadn't eaten in days. Whereupon he took off his hood and stood up, revealing himself. He pounced on the woman and after a while all that was left of her was her coat and shoes. While he was enjoying his meal, his subordinates came to him. They saw their boss eating meat again and said they had information for him. Afterward, they sniffed and said that his food smelled good. The boss ignored what they said and asked what the information was. Then he got an answer that the one they were looking for seems to have traveled south. At least a generation from another town found his trail there. The boss hummed and said that they should never call another demon to know where he was lest he be attacked by someone else. Then he added that fallen gods who have lost their power, this is their finest hour. And to eat him is equivalent to the power of 100 cultivation lives. After that, the demons dispersed and the boss turned into a crow. Together with the flock, he flew up onto the lamppost and transformed back into his human form. UNI, Iwan and Shangwan Wuzai almost immediately encountered their first difficulties while traveling together. It turned out that someone had stolen the shower head from them, causing the girl to be unable to take a shower. They were a little surprised that only the shower heads were stolen. The husky quickly defused the situation and told them not to worry. He had pre-booked a room at the most luxurious hot spring hotel in town. This hotel has two great features, classic Cantonese cuisine and a hot spring with sauna. Husky was pleased to add that this is the only hotel where both men and women can share the hot spring. Shangwan Wuzai was delighted and said that she hadn't had a chance to explore their local classic Cantonese cuisine since she came here. UNI slammed the door of their truck with a clatter. Afterward, he turned to the husky and asked him if he had thrown away the shower head on purpose. Ivan hummed and asked back, wondering if he himself wouldn't want to be with a beautiful girl in such a luxurious hotel. UNI only shook his head and said that if Ivan had so much money that he could afford to book a hotel room for you, he would pay for the fuel with the rest of the money, and Husky agreed surprisingly calmly. After a while, they had already settled into their room at the hotel. Shangwan Wuzai was delighted with the menu, and she confessed that she hadn't realized that the Cantonese classic dishes at the hotel were so good. She especially liked their ribs, steamed but without any particular change in appearance. The girl said she would definitely ask their chef for advice on cooking them. Husky hummed and said that they only tried one dish, but there's also a second dish, after all. Shangwan Wuzai replied that there is a saying you have to try the whole world to be able to cook it later. UNI looked at his watch and got up, saying that it was almost 8 in the morning and he was leaving for his room. Shangwan Wuzai asked him in surprise if he didn't want to try the hot springs here. Ivan wryly replied that he would watch another one right now. Shangwan Wuzai didn't understand what he was talking about at first. Until the husky explained to her that the guy wanted to watch his favorite TV series, Counterattack Sister-in-Law. That's why it was just the two of them who went to the hot spring, Ivan and Shangwan Wuzai. Husky was all excited for the moment. He was looking forward to the moment when they would completely undress and get some privacy. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited them on their approach to the spring. Since Ivan was in the form of a husky, and animals were not allowed to enter there. And at the entrance there was a guard who was watching it. Seeing this, the husky tried to pretend to be a cat, but it didn't pass. Shangwan Wuzai told him that it looked like his plans had failed and she would enter the water first. After which she plunged into the spring. Well, before she could swim even a little bit, Ivan was beside her. Shangwan Wuzai was very surprised and asked him how he had gotten here. The husky smilingly replied that it was from the doggy loophole, for no door could stop him if he wanted to. Then he happily dove under the water. And diving out asked Shangwan Wuzai why she wore a bathing suit. He video once a movie where mixed hot springs is everyone trust each other. Shangwan Wuzai grimaced and asked what kind of stupid movies he was watching. Ivan replied that he didn't care, but she should make out with him today, especially that he had already spent too much money. After a while, Shangwan Wuzai was sitting on a bench by the sweat lodge with Ivan tied up beside her. Husky gave her a judgmental look and asked if it was really necessary to tie him up like that. Shangwan Wuzai looked at him and didn't answer anything. Instead, she asked him who UNI was and how he became so powerful. Husky only chuckled at the word powerful. He agreed to tell his story. UNI was once able to ascend to the heavens and descend to the earth. Powerful he was in general back then. He could be safely called the king of the future generation. But unfortunately, he was put and restrained by the gods in magical chains and left alone on the sacred mountain for thousands of years. And UNI himself was more willing to go to hell rather than stay in the demonic chains, so with the help of Ivan, through many trials, he was reborn on Earth. However, as a result of which, he also lost most of his memory and strength, along with the loss of many sensations peculiar to humans. Hearing this, Shangwan Wuzai asked if that was why he had no sense of taste. And the husky replied that last time it was really strange that he felt a salty taste when he tasted her food. She must have the most excellent food. Shangwan Wuzai let this pass her ears and asked what were the 5 flavors they were looking for then. Ivan replied that those 5 flavors could bring everything back. UNI after he transformed explained that there was only one way to regain his powers and memories that he had lost earlier. He must find the 5 flavors scattered on the ground and then he will remember all the sensations. After that, he could go back to where he came from, where he would be eagerly awaited. But unfortunately, neither Ivan nor UNI ever found out what the 5 flavors were. However, they had recently received news that demons and monsters were common in the southern generation and they had a hope that they could find some information from these types. Shangwan Wuzai was interested to hear about this and she even wondered how the guys could be helped. The next morning, UNI and Ivan slept sweetly in their bed, but for some reason together. Until they were woken up by the sound of knocking on the door, with shouts to open it. UNI got up yawning and went to open the door. Before he could open it and ask what was going on, Shangwan burst in. She told him that her own breakfast was ready and rolled the table into the boys' room. Seeing such abundance, UNI was surprised and asked the girl if she had made it all by herself. Shangwan Wuzai replied that she learned from the chef yesterday and finally understood the true meaning of steamed cooking. She picked up a piece of the dish with her chopsticks and offered the guy a taste of it. UNI tasted a bite, disappointedly said that the flavor was gone again. Ivan sighed and wondered what could be wrong this time. But Shangwan Wuzai seemed was not at all surprised by this state of affairs. She said that of course he wouldn't taste it now. And that was because she guessed that he had eaten demon meat last time. Besides, the girl added, when she went to ask the chef's advice yesterday, the rumor going around was that the chef of the Gunduan-style restaurant was a demon. So she assumed they could find a clue about the 5 flavors there. After breakfast, they went to that restaurant. There were indeed all possible dishes there for every taste and preference. After ordering their food, they sat down at a table and Shangwan Wuzai remarked that their afternoon snack was quite classic and delicious. Yuanai chewed without enthusiasm and remarked that she had actually come here to eat a delicious meal, but that she had come to help him out. Shangwan Wuzai only smiled at this statement and replied that who knows, maybe the clue would appear on its own. That's when the husky intervened and advised the girl to chalk it up. And Yuanai ordered not to offend Shangwan Wuzai, let her do what she wants. Just then, the door of the restaurant opened ajar and some black men peeked in. Yuanai looked there in surprise, and the husky man noticed what a murderous aura. Some kind of shadow did appear in that corner, but soon disappeared. Shangwan Wuzai speculated that it might be a clue. One that just appeared and disappeared immediately, hummed the guy in response. Here they listened to the conversations of the customers who were discussing some rumors going around about this restaurant. One of the guys started to justify his recent behavior, but the others gave him a puzzled look. They explained to the guy that they were discussing the back room in the kitchen of the chef of the restaurant. Rumor has it that he always locks himself in there and yells all the time, and that this man has a bit of a strange character, but it's actually because the dishes here are very difficult to cook and that's why he goes there to swear very loudly. His interlocutors asked him how he knew all this and the guy said that the owner's wife told him about it. The guys hummed and continued the conversation and one of them said that this cook has some problems anyway. For example, he always cooks alone in the kitchen and won't let anyone near him, and people also heard that he even casts a spell before cooking. Combined with his rather strange appearance, there's a good chance that he's a demon cook. No sooner had they finished speaking than the same cook appeared after them and asked what they were whispering about. The men shrieked in surprise. And the cook asked if perhaps they were not satisfied with his food. But he was immediately assured that the food was excellent. The chef's name was Great Desire Lu Jifan. The men began to talk among themselves about how they hoped he wasn't going to eat them, even though they were quite scared. Yuanai came over and calmly said that these men were saying that he was a psychopath and that he was a demon. They immediately began to resent and deny. And Yuanai continued and said that it wasn't either of those things. It's just that it looks like the chef has contracted with a demon. At this, the chef stopped and said he didn't know what he was talking about. After which, he hid in his back room and slammed the door. Shangwan Wuzai asked the guy how he knew the chef wasn't a demon. He replied that if it was a demon, the demon suppression blade would react. Then Ivan thought about it, what if it wasn't a demon? Then where did that demonic aura come from when he appeared? Meanwhile, Lu Jifan hurriedly closed the door behind him and began to call out to the iceman. He directly demanded shakily that she should come out sooner. Soon a young girl appeared in front of him and asked him where he was in such a hurry. Then she fully appeared in front of him and wondered if he wanted her again. And the man started yelling that some strange green-haired guy had just asked him if he had signed a contract with a demon. Then he asked what they should do if they knew about her. She was dead. But the girl put her finger to his lips, as if to show him to shut up. After that she hugged him and suggested to start by playing a fun game with her. She took a banana and began to peel it. She told Jifan that this game is called "You Bite, I'll Take a Bite." To which the cook suggested leaving in case the guy came in. The girl objected that as a 1,000-year-old monster she had nothing to fear, she had no equal in strength. The man objected that the long-haired guy here didn't look like a normal person. Yuanai suddenly appeared in front of them and asked if he was the one they were talking about. Jifan yelled at him with a comma who let him in here. Husky looked at the ice lady with delight and asked if she had a boyfriend. To which Yuanai grabbed him and demanded him to stop talking human. The ice woman looked at them skeptically. And Jifan asked in horror if the dog had just spoken or if he had imagined it. To which the dog shouted that he was a husky, not a dog. Not paying attention to their scuffle, Yuanai asked the cook if he had made a contract with the demon. After that, he went over to the ice lady and asked her directly, "Does she know something about the 5 flavors?" To which she replied that no, she didn't know. Uni stretched out disappointedly. It looks like she doesn't know it either, and turned around to leave. But Shangguan Wuzai stopped him by grabbing his jacket and said that how can he ask such questions, this way he will never find an answer in his life. She then turned to the demon and said that this guy had lost his former strength and senses for some reason. He now needed to find the 5 flavors scattered on the ground, and then asked if she knew anything about it. Ice Lady replied that she did, and she didn't know what they were talking about at first. Shangguan Wuzai, Uni and Ivan pounced on her, thinking she knew something. But it turned out that the demon didn't know anything. Uni almost attacked her, but Shangguan Wuzai stopped him. And the Ice Lady explained that he had lost his spirit and needed to find the 5 flavors to get his soul back. She then calmly said that the raven could help him. Uni and Shangguan Wuzai didn't realize who she was talking about. And the demon said that the raven comes without casting a shadow and leaves without leaving a trace. Where there are ravens, there he is. Also, he can see everything. That's why he knows anything, and any question of the demon world can be answered if you find him. After which, she hugged Jiafeng and said that it was because of the crow that she fell in love with him. Uni and his friends were about to leave, puzzled as to how he could find the raven now. Suddenly, his blade activated and the murderous aura reappeared. The demon suddenly shouted that it was a killing blade suppressing demons and let Uni stay still and tell him what he wanted. Uni took hold of the blade and the demon screamed as if in wild pain. After which, it froze Uni and his companion. Jiafeng rushed to her and asked what happened. The Ice Woman explained to him that these people were just a gathering of demon extermination monsters. The thing in the guy's hand is called the Demon Suppression Blade, which is capable of killing any demon. The demon then exclaimed, "Didn't he see that guy wanted to kill her?" Jiafeng asked in a panic, "What should they do now?" Ice Girl replied that it was natural to run out the back door, and the freeze she'd made wouldn't last long, and she shouldn't run into those people again. They ran and Jiafeng asked, wasn't she the one who said she was a 1,000-year-old demon who had no equal? Ice Lady replied that Anna 1,000 years was just grooming herself. They were practicing. Tuda didn't make it to the exit and ran outside. There, to their surprise, they ran into the chef's apprentice, a guy named Fu Dezheng, who was riding a motorcycle. He was equally surprised to see them. And Jiafeng asked what wasn't he supposed to be busy at the front desk, what was he even doing here? But the guy in turn asked what it is with him next to him. The man replied that it was a new toy he bought for his son and picked up the icebox. Then he said to the student that since they had already met, could he take him home? The disciple replied okay, and Jiafeng got on the motorcycle behind the guy. At the same time, he asked him to drive faster. The student started the motor and told the teacher to hold on tight. However, contrary to expectations, the student drove the teacher to some abandoned building. Jiafeng didn't realize what was going on at first, until the disciple explained to him that he wanted to destroy him. The teacher asked in amazement what he was saying. And Fu Dezheng replied that he was always yelling at him in the back room and scolding him. He tolerated it for a long time because he was his teacher after all. Then the guy asked if he thought he really didn't know anything about him. Jiafeng heard this and asked what they should do now. The disciple said that he didn't even teach him his skills, he was like an outlet for him. Then Jiafeng realized what he really looked like in his disciple's eyes. And Fu Dezheng continued his tirade and said that although he had been yelling at him all day long to try harder, but his tremendous cooking skills were not really his talent. Quite obviously that it was all due to the demon behind him. After which, he demanded that she stop pretending and break her contract with the demon. Jiafeng didn't quite understand what had happened to his disciple and how he himself had become like a monster. While Jiafeng was dealing with Fu Dezheng Uni, Shangguan Wuzai and Iwan began to unfreeze as the effects of the demon's spell stopped working. Uni happily got out of the ice putas and thought that his body wasn't yet strong enough to such exertion. Husky demanded to help him get out, but the guide didn't hear him. He was attracted to the light that was coming from under the open door to the back room. When he came to it, he saw that there was a raven there. Ivan was shouting at him not to dare to go anywhere alone. Jiefan looked in horror at his student who had turned into a black rooster. The teacher tried to understand how it happened, but the demon reached out to him and demanded that he give him the ice cock now. Fu Dezheng began to complain that he didn't want to try and exert himself because it was very hard, and while his teacher relied on the demon who had become a chef and he somehow had to obey him because unlike him he had status, money and respect, and while he had to become one of the best instead of being one of the mediocre graduates who wouldn't find a job and would make money on a car. And then with the words that the future is his, Dezheng rushed to attack his teacher with his wife. Looking at all of this, Ice said that it looked like he was possessed by a demon. She shrieked and tried to fend off the attack, which she managed to do with the help of the freeze. The rooster wasn't going to give up just like that and did a one-legged stance, intending to resist the attack directed at him. But the icecock wasn't going to stop either and continued to attack with the power of ice. Soon the ice enveloped the rooster from head to toe. But the rooster suddenly freed himself quite easily and turned to the iceman and said condescendingly that it didn't seem to be working. And no sooner had he finished than a huge frozen ball of thorny ice flew at him. Ice Lady said with satisfaction in her voice that this was the end of him. But she was surprised when the rooster easily smashed her balloon and asked if it made any sense. Jiefan were surprised and wondered why this chicken was so difficult to handle, and the cook remarked that it was probably a black rooster, which offended the demon, who said that they had not come to the food market. Then he yelled and gathered his power and directed it at the demon. The ice cat received the attack and because of it fell to the ground with a cry of pain. And the rooster demanded to give him the demon's show again as he now wanted to be the head chef. Jiefan hesitated and said that his chefship doesn't really have the merit of the demon. Because real cooking is never too easy, and with those words he made the rooster even more angry. But the demon didn't believe him and demanded that he explain to him how he could have such a superpower. He wounded Jiefan and again demanded that he break his contract with the demon. But the cook still stubbornly refused to do so. Then the rooster yelled that if he didn't agree, he would burn him alive. Then said that she would terminate the contract herself. With these words, she took out the contract intending to tear it up. Jiefan cried out in despair looking at it, but she had already done her job. She then said that now Ice Qilin had nothing to do with him, Lu Jiefan. Jiefan shouted her name in despair. However, Ice Qilin had already knelt down in front of Fu Dezheng and hugged his leg and said that he had such great strength and now she would become his wife. After that she took out a banana and told about the game, you take a bite and I will take a bite. When Jiefan saw this, he cried out that she had betrayed him. And the ice lady asked Fu Dezheng to make a new contract with her, but to keep the chef alive. Rooster replied that if that was the case, he would agree. And the ice lady suddenly released ice spikes that dug into the rooster's entire body with a scream, "Die you ugly bird." The girl hoped that this would be enough for him. After that, she rushed to Jiefan, who was delighted by her pretense, and she asked him not to say anything, just to kiss her. They had already reached for each other when suddenly a shard flew into the cook's back. The ice pick was horrified by this, and the rooster, who had committed this act, asked her how could she break the fake contract and cheat him. It seems they were very underestimated. The monster rose to his feet again in front of Jiefan and Icewoman and, despite the ice flows in his body, and shouted that he is the one with Aowen's power. He is the Dark King of eternal fire and no ice is afraid of him. I walked out of the restaurant and looked around confused. He didn't see the chef or his demon nearby. He didn't understand where they had gone and decided to use his blade to unleash some more power in search for them. The blade sowed with yellow light after his words. I himself was entangled in its yellow threads as if he had been transported somewhere. But in reality, he was standing in the middle of the road, being driven by a motorcycle. The driver, an insolent guy, demanded that he move out of the way immediately. But I was in a trance and didn't move. The guy kept yelling at him to get out of the way. His friends sitting behind him supported him, but he still didn't react in any way. Then they were not rude to him and called him all sorts of names. Suddenly, I opened his eyes as he found what he was looking for. Ice Girl was sitting next to Jiefan and told Monster Rooster that she would really marry him this time. just let him not kill her and Jiefeng. But it seemed the monster wasn't going to listen to them. He unleashed a rather powerful aura attack on Ice Girl. It caused her to start choking. Jiefeng wished he could help her, but there was nothing he could do. And Ice Paw was getting hotter and hotter by the second. Jiefeng then asked Fu Dezheng to stop the attack, and he suggested that he should settle things between himself. But the monster ignored his words. He continued to attack the 1,000-year ice monster Qilinyu because he knew that if he ate her, his strength would increase because then Mr. Aoyin would give him more strength. The ice monster continued to complain about the heat, and Jiefeng still couldn't do anything but summon the monster to his senses. That's when Yunai, who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, found them. He saw that the attacking monster was merely endowed with spiritual energy. Jiefeng was either surprised or pleased to see Yunai. And the monster told the guy that since he realized that he had spiritual energy, it should be clear to him that it wasn't done by a little thing like him. And Yunai ignored his words and asked him why he had become possessed in this guy's body. Jiefeng also wondered why the monster chose Fu Dezheng specifically. And the monster replied that it was because of the fact that minus for minus gives plus. Yunai, Jiefeng and Ice Lady looked at him incomprehensibly. And the monster announced that Yunai would be the first to be eaten by Aoyin. After which, it directed a powerful fire attack at him. The guy calmly watched this avalanche coming at him. Afterwards, he raised his hand and used the demon destruction blade to try and stop the attack. Some of the time he was quite successful in holding back the demon's attacks. But the demon rooster was not going to give up so easily. It attacked again and again using fire. Yunai had been fighting it for a while and realized that he was being attacked by eternal fire. Ice Girl confirmed that it was eternal fire and added that it was very dangerous. But if Yunai saves them, which she really hoped he would, she would agree to fulfill his every wish. Yunai replied that he didn't need any such thing except to find the raven. No sooner had they finished their conversation than the eternal fire came down on him with renewed vigor. Taking care of this avalanche, the guy rushed to counter the attack. He withstood several waves of fire. After a while he managed to stop the fire with his hands. But in doing so, he received a severe burn, which was bad enough for him. A diamond took advantage of his confusion and rushed at him again. This time, the power of the fire was so terrifying that it surprised and even frightened Yunai. Yunai watched with fright as the fire rained down on him, and soon he was thrown away from the monster. At the same time, the guy received some pretty tangible burns on his body. And the monster announced that the eternal fire not only burns forever, but also has a powerful regeneration ability. So he could attack it again 1,000,000 times. In other words, his pitiful strength wouldn't be enough to harm it in any meaningful way. The monster finished. Yunai realized that he had to use too much strength to unfreeze and find the ice chef, so now he just didn't have the strength to fight properly. And the demon didn't stop and said that even if they joined forces, they could barely get to his demon level. And the irony of fate for them all is that the one in front right now is the one with spiritual energy, and he is too weak. While Yunai was dealing with the monster, Shanghuan, Wuzai and Ivan also unfroze and came to their senses. Shanghuan Wuzai, shivering her whole body from the cold, looked around and didn't find Yunai beside them. So she asked the husky about where the guy was. Ivan immediately realized that Yunai needed help and shouted that they should quickly catch up with him. That demon wasn't that easy. But Shanghuan Wuzai didn't quite understand him. And then Ivan began to explain to her that there was a special classification of powers in the world. It is represented in the form of a 3-layered pyramid. The top is God, and the middle is demon, and the bottom is thing. Where people, plants and animals are classified as things. And after evolution, they can become demons. Although Yunai's strength wasn't sealed, but he has powerful basic skills. They are more than enough to handle ordinary things or demons with his bare hands. But if that guy had evolved to God level, even Yunai wouldn't be able to handle him. Husky sniffed and found Yunai's trail, then he and Shanghuan Wuzai ran down it. Around them lay many bodies of people who had died from the murderous aura. Shangguan Wuzai asked if it was possible that this killing aura came from a god, although to be honest, she thought that UNI was invincible. Ivan replied that UNI was indeed invincible, but if he tried to defeat this Pepito monster, the consequences would be unpredictable. In the meantime, UNI himself, between pauses in the fight, asked Ice Lady if she was sure that the raven knew about the 5 flavors. Icicle replied that yes, for sure he knows. UNI was satisfied with her answer and entered the battle again. A blue haze began to envelope him. This meant that the guy had activated the demon suppression blade. He raised this blade above his head and pointed it at the monster. As the kitty began to work, he activated the ability to remove all restrictions from the blade. After which, the blade became incredibly strong, and so UNI was able to extinguish the eternal fire. Contrary to expectations, the monster admired this behavior of UNI and suggested him to join the alliance of the successful ones. Upon hearing this, Ice Lady was stunned and Jiefan asked what this was about. Icicle said that she had heard of them before. According to the legend, a few years ago, a great immortal demon descended to the earth. This demon has the ability to transfer its power to other creatures, and they in turn become demons. All it takes is to touch him. Demons under his command recruited other demons to join the organization. Anyone who dared to resist instantly eaten by them. His power was also able to make the lower demons into higher demons, and those then used their powers to spread the organization. In this way, the alliance of the successful became bigger and bigger, and the number of demons in it grew. Hearing this, even the demon in the form of a rooster confirmed that Mr. Aowen's greatness was undeniable. Now all he has to do is eat the light-bearing dragon to rise above all the gods. The light-bearing dragon is a deity with the head of a man and the body of a snake, and opening his eyes, he gave the world light, closing them, plunged the earth into darkness. Now he is one step away from creating a state of the successful. Therefore, if you and I agreed to help him develop, he could receive a gift of more than spiritual energy. However, the guy replied that he wasn't interested in the offer, which infuriated the demon, who called him a piece of shit and told him not to take offense now that he would destroy him. Then they both swung their blades again and the fighting resumed. However, this time too, the monster calmly repelled the blade attacks. But UNI did not let himself be offended either, and although not without difficulty, he was able to hold back its fire attacks. Moreover, the guy was even able to throw the monster far away from him. But the monster was not afraid of this. He laughed and said that since he has eternal fire, capital calmly can recover. He then tried to make a recovery, but he failed. This confused the demon rooster. He did not understand how this was possible. After which he screamed in terror, questioning why his recovery wasn't working. Ice Girl stood in Jifan's embrace and watched the demon suppression blade work with rapt attention. She had heard a lot about this blade. What she didn't know was that it was capable of suppressing demon magic, as well as it was capable of nullifying all demonic abilities, which ended up being a big surprise to the rooster demon. But even now, the demon was not very confused and said that even though it possessed such interesting things, it also possessed spiritual energy. In addition, added the rooster, let them not forget that he is now in the body of another person. If you hit him, he will not suffer. What will be hurt is the person who joined the alliance and who he used as a puppet. He constantly admonished Fu Dezheng, whispering to him that his teacher wasn't even trying to teach him how to cook, while he himself only became so good at cooking because of the demon. That's why he doesn't tell him about it. He was just using everyone around him, especially students like Fu Dezheng, who was just a pawn and nobody cared about his fate. Jiefang had no intention of helping him realize his hopes, dreams, and bright future. All his struggles and hard work were in vain, so the demon offered him to follow him and take everything that should be his by right. For 6 whole months the monster mumbled in the fool's ear about it, and finally he agreed to be possessed by him. All the more reason for such an impulsive graduate to believe whatever he's told. And now if you and I hit him, it would be Fu Dezheng who would die, thus one less fool in the world. UNI was unimpressed by this speech and was about to bring his blade to bear on the monster. But he was interrupted by Jiefang, who stood in the way. He asked the guy to stop and not to kill him. Jiefang felt guilty that he was the reason why De Zhang had turned into such a monster. He had simply failed to raise him properly. He then turned to the black rooster and asked it to leave his disciple's body. The rooster only laughed and asked Jiefang if he was not the one who beat and yelled at his apprentice for his position as a chef. The monster believed that the human race had long ago turned into a butic group of losers, not caring for others, which soon it would destroy itself. And Ziffan, after listening to his speech, remembered himself when he was in the place of an apprentice. Every young man who had just joined the society was always enthusiastic. But the harshness of reality easily threw the newcomers into a daze. So they began to wonder why the world was not as they had imagined it to be, whether all those things which they had been taught in school were brazen lies. He was also scolded and humiliated by his teacher when he was learning to cook. When the position of chef was taken away from him, he cried very hard. But then, he told Jiefang the following, that he was well aware of the hatred towards him. But he gives him a spatula and wishes from the bottom of his heart to surpass him with all that hatred. Because that is the only way their craft can continue. The airiness and cruelty shown by a man is not always what is intended in his heart. Therefore, Jiefang asks UNI to put himself in this guy's shoes and understand him. UNI flipped him off and said that it's already been 5 minutes and he's in a big hurry. The monster rejoiced, realizing that the chef's entreaties had no effect, and he was happily ready to accept death. UNI raised his blade to strike. Jiefang shouted for him not to do so. An ice lady covered her face with her hands in terror. The monster was demanding to hit him on the head so that he could call him in charge. UNI took a good swing and aimed a strike. After which, the blade in his hands suddenly grew. And the monster rooster himself left the shell of a human. He was in his usual bird form, unprotected in front of everyone, and looked around in bewilderment, wondering how he had gotten here. Fu Dezheng's body was free again. Everyone immediately rushed with joy to him, lying on the ground in front of them. The boy said that he was very sorry. And the rooster kept looking around, trying to figure out where he was and how come his great spirit had been knocked out, and it probably turns out that that power wasn't God level. Does someone as powerful as Mr. Awin still exist in this world? The rooster wondered. Then, he noticed an enraged UNI in front of him, with a blade behind his shoulder. The rooster began to shout that he was the Lord of Eternal Fire and was not afraid of anyone, while UNI calmly grabbed him by the neck. Then the monster said that it's not too late to change his plans. And UNI asked him that he was looking for the light-bearing dragon. And choking the bird tightly, he said that the light-bearing dragon right in front of him was him. The rooster coughed and demanded to stop and let him go immediately. But he was well aware that his moments of life were already numbered. UNI was lying on the bed completely exhausted. Ivan sitting beside him also marveled at how his body was able to withstand the removal of the restriction. Then he scolded his friend for apparently wanting to show off, and then he told UNI that he was going to turn into a handsome man himself soon, so he didn't have time to take care of him. So he's leaving him here alone for a few days. Flicking the guy's nose, the husky said. Before he could say anything, he suddenly froze. And Ice came into the room, only now she was a little taller and in different clothes. The girl said that this dog was very disgusting and shooed it away from the guy's bed. She then leaned over to UNI and told him that he was so courageous when he saved her. She leaned even closer to him and told him that she would have eaten him like that. Adding that she had heard that he was now unable to move due to loss of strength, the girl asked to be allowed to thank him. Fu Dezheng, Jifan and Shangguan Wuzai heard all of this perfectly well standing behind the wall from them in the kitchen. Jifan was teaching Shangguan Wuzai how to cook, and to his surprise, she was learning very quickly. The chef admitted that his foolish apprentice couldn't make this soup after being with him for a year, but with her, they had only exchanged a few words on the way back and she had already fully learned how to make it. Shangguan Wuzai replied that cooking techniques are very similar all over the world. It's just that each place has its own climate and culture, so the flavors are different. After adding the flour gelatin at the end, you should cover the pot with a lid to prevent the flavor from escaping, the girl said, and covered the pot. Jiefang yelled at the student to look at Shangwan Wuzai and learn, because she is so insightful and he is so stupid. The chef stood and pondered the recipe and how Shangwan Wuzai had ennobled it. And the girl herself remembered how she ran to Yunai when he was fighting that terrifying monster and fell to the ground without strength. Not much time had passed since then, and at that moment, she never thought that she would be thinking about some soup just a few hours later. And Jiefang thought, this girl is hardly even 20 years old. She looks too young, and yet she already has good culinary skills and experience. Not the culinary genius his teacher had told him about at the time, the chef thought. He didn't even know the background of these people. Shangwan Wuzai took the pot of black rooster soup and went to Yuni's place. But just when she opened the door, she immediately saw the ice lady unzipping his pants. She jumped up too and said that she just saw the stains on his pants and wanted to help him clean them up. After the incident was dealt with, Shangwan Wuzai offered the guy something to eat. She said that since the soup was made from demon meat, they would be able to see if he could taste it. Yunai cautiously tasted a spoonful of soup and Shangwan Wuzai eagerly asked how he felt. Yuni's face brightened up and he said he could taste the flavor and could even name the dish. It's one of the 5 flavors in China, umami, said the guy. Shangwan Wuzai rejoiced that the demonic ingredients were manifesting his taste sensations and suggested that perhaps the 5 flavors were also related to demons. Ice was a little offended that he reacted more violently to the soup than he did to her. She went to the kitchen and Jiefang suggested she try the demon soup. The chef confessed that he had never tasted such a thing and she should try it too. Ice Lady was skeptical of such a suggestion, but she still tasted a spoonful of the soup. The demon came to love the taste of it. Meanwhile, the husky still in captivity on the ice floe thought it would be a good idea for everyone to remember him too. When it got dark, Icefish and Yunai Iwan and Shangwan Wuzai were walking through the forest by the light of the moon. Soon, they stopped at a huge oak tree. The ice lady uttered a phrase, look for a crow always on a dark night by moonlight and in the place where the crows gathered, offer your own demon blood. With these words she cut her finger and blood came out. The ice lady raised her finger and said, my power is true, he is the companion of the night, the clear, great month which is surrounded by gloom. I call out to you, appear the raven. Yunai stared with all his eyes at what was happening. Only Ice Lady finished the incantation, as the demon raven descended on the oak and asked what they mortals want from him. Yunai and company stared in amazement at the raven that appeared in front of them. The raven turned into a man who was standing on a tree limb. He looked at those who called him and asked what they, mortals, wanted from him. Suddenly, the bough under his feet broke. And the raven began to fall down with a scream. He landed awkwardly in front of those who called out to him. Yunai and Iwan and the girls watched the scene in bewilderment. After getting up and shaking himself off, the raven put his hands to his sides, looking at the guys. After that, he repeated his question and asked them to tell what their request was. The ice lady was not shy and asked him directly why he was talking so strangely. The raven replied in surprise with a question, isn't that how respectable people talk? The ice lady only waved her hand and turned to Yunai and told him that he was an all-knowing raven and he could ask him anything he wanted. Yunai started to speak uncertainly, but the raven interrupted him. He told the guy that there was no need for unnecessary details. He also added that he knew about his quest for the 5 flavors and also called him by name. This surprised Yunai himself. And the raven looked at him slyly and said that the information he was interested in could be found out, but on the condition that he bought something from him. After all, Monster was also a businessman. After saying these words, the raven raised his gloved hand and held a magic ball in it. Yunai and the others looked at it with astonishment. In this ball was a portal through which he began to lay out all sorts of things in front of the company. In front of them was a table with an umbrella with a bone instead of a handle, glasses, lighters, an unusual helmet or hat, and other amazing things. Raven proudly said, pointing at the table, that these things couldn't have been created by their inferior human brains, they were all masterpieces that he had worked on for a very long time. Shangwan Wuzai picked up a buzz hat and asked what it was. Raven replied that it was a reminder hat. after which he put it on his head. He explained that there are many roads, but one should choose the safest one. If one drives wrongly, one's relatives will shed tears. Then he asked the ice lady what to do when someone unexpectedly appears on her path, blocking her way, and smilingly said that the problem was easily solved by pressing that button on the horn. Ivan snorted condescendingly. What does he need a mouth for then, unless it turns out to be for beauty? Shangwan Wuzai picked up the next item, an umbrella, and was surprised that this umbrella wouldn't open. Raven took the umbrella from her and said it was too scary. He had a white bone demon made. It is called the White Bone Sun umbrella. Shangwan Wuzai concluded that this umbrella, judging by its name Sun Umbrella, should only be opened when the sun is shining. Raven confirmed her guess and remarked that it was very environmentally friendly. Ivan, who was watching this, grumbled that the idea of creating such things would not have occurred to an ordinary person. And the Raven continued to explain what his things meant. It turned out that lighters are earrings that are convenient to carry around so that you can always get a fire. The goggles, they're color perceptive. Putting them on you can see any color, even the color of intestinal gases. And a remote control kit that can be put on your head like a bandage, so you don't have to be afraid if you lose the remote control somewhere. You and I noticed that it all looked pretty great. Ivan asked him if he was in his right mind and if it looked like a normal person's invention. The guy didn't listen to him and asked the Raven how much it cost. Crow replied that 5,000 yuan and only in cash. Yuan I took out the money and said he only had 50 in cash. Crow was offended and said that he wanted to cheat him. Yuan I then asked him that he wouldn't sell him anything now. The monster made a puzzled look and asked him to let him think for a while. After which, his face lit up with a smile and he said that he had something. He took out a glove and said that it was a spatial glove and he would sell it for 50 yuan. Seeing this, Shangwan Wuzai asked that it was the same glove he used when he took things out. Can it store things? The girl asked. Raven said yes, and he made many of them. He didn't need them. Yuan I said disappointedly, it seems there was no use for the glove. Ivan agreed with him and said that it seems this monster just wants them to part with the money in his favor. But Shangwan Wuzai countered that this glove was very useful and they would take it. Soon Yuan I was already putting the glove on his hand. And the Raven pronounced that now that they had made a deal, he could provide him with the information. The monster took out a blade whose tip was burning. With this blade he drew a map in front of everyone right in the sky. After that, he told them that the very 5 flavors they were looking for were scattered in 5 places. Everyone looked at the map carefully. And the Raven said that he only knew that the closest taste was in the west of Yuanchuan. That was why you and I should go there and find the first taste first. Hearing this, the guy asked what exactly the first taste was. The Raven spread his hands and said that it was a human being itself, but also an unusual one. He is the same as Crow and you and I. He is a god. And this person's name is Bu Zhang. After saying these words, the monster turned back into a raven and soared up, flying away from his new acquaintances. The man approached the house, which was located at the address, 17 Happiness Street. When he saw it, he rejoiced and joyfully said the phrase, "At last." Taking out his cell phone, he started typing a message, in which he wrote the following: "Baby, I'm already under your house." Taking the rose in his teeth, he walked up to the house. Then he pushed open the front door and stepped inside the building, its windows glowing with a welcoming yellow light. But as soon as he stepped inside, the address on the house changed, and the house itself began to glow blue. Sometime later, in another city, Shangwan Wuzai stood in front of a grill smoking from a barbecue and told Yuan I, who was sneaking up on her, carefully holding onto the wall of the car, that they would not reach Yuanchuan today, so they should rest here for a while. Yuan I didn't have time to reply anything to this as he didn't feel very good. In the next instant, his legs went under. After which, he cried out and fell down leaning on his arm. Shangwan Wuzai worriedly said that he hadn't fully recovered yet and he shouldn't be so bold. Yuan I didn't take long to think with the help of a newly acquired glove from a raven. With her help, he got crutches and was able to walk on them. Shangwan Wuzai, looking at him quietly, said that even though he was so young, he already had to undergo rehabilitation. The door swung open noisily and Ivan appeared. He was clearly in high spirits and cheerfully said that this Sunday was beautiful. He then looked at Shangwan Wuzai and Yunai and said that he had other plans for today and so he wouldn't waste his time on them. After which, he took out his phone and said that the werewolves were turning into a dark night on Sunday and he should definitely take advantage of his free day and have a good time. In his phone he had a text message with a girl they had arranged a date with. Ivan started humming a love song and headed away with an easy gait. Shangwan Wuzai stared after him in surprise. She wondered aloud to Yunai if this Sunday was really special for Ivan. Yunai hummed and said that it was special, to be honest. At the same time, a tasting was going on in one of the restaurants. Everyone was running around, serving all kinds of dishes to the restaurant's guest. When they brought a steak to their customer, everyone crowded around him. They looked longingly at the taster and asked if he was satisfied with their afternoon snack. The visitor was sitting at a table, and in front of him was a camera phone with a camera on and broadcasting where he was turning to cut the meat. This visitor was a fancy guy named Sun Tao, stated that it was a first-class filet mignon medium rare, while he poked the meat on a fork. He tasted a piece of the steak and said that everything was fine and there was perfectly enough of everything in the meat. He then said that it was pretty good for the only restaurant with 2 Michelin stars and it would be a mistake for his viewers not to check it out here. And to top it off, the guy thanked Li Air for the cruise ship. And he politely asked the waitstaff to bring him 5 more servings of snails, 5 more servings of young pigeons and 5 more servings of steaks. The waitress asked in surprise if he was still hungry after the dishes he had eaten earlier. But she was kicked in the side by the owner, forcing her to shut up, and ordered to prepare more food for Mr. Sun. Abitun Katia told him that this shameless boy could only eat enough for a royal dinner. And he replied to her that she was stupid and whether she even knew who this guy was. He's the hottest fashionista in their day and rumor has it that every grocery store he's ever broadcast live doubled their sales immediately. Besides, the director continued, this guy has his own finance companies and several real estate properties. His family is very rich. Having said that, he turned to Sun Tao and said that he was grateful for his cooperation and invited him to stop by again if he had the chance. The guy thanked him for his hospitality and said that his business would be very prosperous. The staff happily saw him off, inviting him to come again sometime for sure. Sun Tao got into his red car and slammed the door. Putting on his glasses, he thought that this was still not even close to the taste of those. Without finishing the thought, he realized that he was still hungry and it looked like he would have to find something else fresher for dinner tonight. Yunai picked up the second kebab and was about to try it. Shangwan Wuzai saw this and ran up to him and took away the meat, saying that she had just put the chicken wings on the grill. Can't the guy see that they are still raw? They didn't hear some movement in a dark place on the street and looked over there. In front of them appeared a young girl that quietly did not look. Soon she dared and walked closer to them. Seeing this, Shangwan Wuzai perplexedly hummed. Yunai asked her who she was without a tone of friendliness. The girl mumbled something, looking longingly at the grill. Noticing this, Shangwan Wuzai asked her if she was hungry. The girl hesitantly replied that she hadn't eaten for a few days and asked if she could have some food. She added that she would give her treasure in return and then went into her purse. She felt a weapon pointed at her and looked up in surprise. It was Yunai who abruptly stopped her and ordered her not to move. After which he announced that she was a demon. The day before, a large orphanage had introduced a new member of the family, whose name was Lu Dayton. He was a little boy who was an orphan. He was put in front of the rest of the family and asked to take care of him. One of the family members, the orphan Guan Ergu, extended his hand and said welcome to the family. The boy extended his hand in return and said, "Hi guys." But instead of responding to his greeting, Guan Ergu punched him and knocked him to the ground. After which he told the newcomer to remember, when he came here, he obeys him and only does what he says. Since in this orphanage he is the eldest and so they all have to do what he says without question. And if he tells the teacher everything, he will not spare him and he had better realize it at once. To this the newcomer knelt down and said that they were bullying people like that. Then he raised his hand up and said, "Aren't they afraid that they will be struck by lightning?" After that the sky was suddenly cut by flashes of lightning. Everyone looked up in surprise and was frightened. They began to stammer and asked who he was. Lu Dayton replied that it looked like there was no hiding it anymore. And with his hands spread out, he said that he was actually a great immortal with outstanding abilities and was only here to go through the trials. Afterwards, Lu Dayton snidely asked who was taking the lead, but incredibly already realized it himself. Everyone looked at him in bewilderment and consternation. One thing they knew for sure was that the guy was immortal and they had met him. And Lu Dayton himself was actually frightened by the fact that suddenly thunder rumbled. He did not expect it himself. It scared him to death. Guan Erga suddenly said that he did not believe him and laughed. He then pointed his hand at him and said that if he was really a great immortal, let him then tell them what great deeds he had already managed to do in his life. Lu Dayton frowned and replied that he would tell them what he had done now. The guy started to think about what the immortal could have done. He needed to come up with it faster. He needed to use his genius brain to the maximum. Noticing this, Guan Ergu stated that he was a liar as he couldn't think of anything. Hearing this, the guy got angry and said that little kids like them couldn't understand the work of a great immortal. They just can't do it. And finished his speech with such a phrase that he is naturally here to destroy the demons. Although he was scared, he exulted to himself that he had adapted well to such pressure and he really turns out to be a genius. Then one of the guys asked him that since he was a great immortal, could he then kill a demon in the Street of Happiness? Hearing this, the other guy said that he had heard that many monks did not come back from there alive. He wondered, is Big Brother really that good? Guan Ergu resented this music, so someone is called Elder Brother besides him. Lu Dayton said that he was indeed very strong, and thought to himself that he had no idea that these guys really believed in gods and demons, so it was very easy to deceive them. Guan Ergu replied that since he was so strong, let him go where he was told, otherwise no one would believe that he was some kind of immortal. Besides, Happy Street is the most evil place here and the teacher never let them go there. If he's so capable, then it's worth it to test it out. Lu Dayton didn't object and replied that he agreed, but Guan Ergu should go with him. There was nothing to do and the guy agreed. Soon they were already walking under the light of the moon along the fence on the road to the Street of Happiness. Lu Dayton was humming something to himself, and Guan Ergu was walking all shrunken, as he was a little scared. Soon, Guan Ergu couldn't stand it and said that something like this could exist in this world. It was only a joke for sure. Lu Dayton kindly replied that if he was afraid, he might not go with him. The guy said that if he didn't go with him, he would surely run away. Here Lu Dayton tripped and fell down, losing his glasses in the process. He took everything by digging his hands on the pavement in search of his glasses. And Guan Ergu saw that they had come to the Street of Happiness 7 and the entrance of this house enters some guy with a rose in his teeth. Guan Ergu watched him carefully. To his surprise he saw that he began to seem to dissolve behind the doorway. Soon, he opened his mouth and shouted at the top of his voice that there was a man there. Lu Dayton couldn't see anything without his glasses, so he didn't immediately realize what he meant. Fortunately, he soon found his glasses and put them on and asked in surprise what kind of man he was talking about, since the street in front of his eyes was completely empty. Then Guan Ergu stammered and started pointing his finger somewhere while mumbling incoherently. Seeing this, Lu Dayton asked the guy in amazement if he had gone crazy. He even walked closer to the entrance and looked around. As before, the street was empty. This was what he told Guan Ergu about. After which he asked why he was so scared. After all, there was no god and demons in this world, that was all. Before Lu Dayton could finish speaking, it was as if something hit his head. Then everything around him began to sink into a darkness and both of them screamed. Soon, everything around them turned red. Then a tree appeared in front of them. It was very big and it was as if it was opening the front entrance of a cave. Looking at all this, Lu Dayton exclaimed that it couldn't be. After which, they directed now to inspect what had appeared around them. Lu Dayton calmed down today and said that it couldn't be a hallucination, most likely it was some kind of joke. Guan Erga's show along with him, we were more scared, and me, than before. In addition, some kind of monster with tentacles appeared near them. Lu Dayton didn't seem to be scared and was watching the surroundings with interest. The monster continued to approach them and soon its face appeared. Then Lu Dayton turned around and saw it. Suddenly, the demon approached Guan Ergu. It stuck out its tongue, which was like a snake. Seeing this, Guan Ergu shouted in horror that it was a demon. He yelled at the top of his voice that it was a demon. However, this did not help him and soon he lost his head. The demon had torn it off. Then he said that another head for Mr. Aowen as an appetizer for today's feast. The little monsters that appeared in front of the main monster giggled. They began to discuss among themselves as they gathered around the guy's body, saying that they would love to have a piece of Guan Ergu since he looked fat. But one of the Demanu took umbrage and said that it was Aoyenu-san. At the main monster said that it was indeed his accomplice who had also infiltrated the abode. Hearing this, Lu Dayton laughed and told the Demanu gathered around that he was the one who lured that little fatty here. After which he said in a satisfied manner that Mr. Aowen would be satisfied. To me, you laughed and were a little surprised. And the head demon said that means you are one of theirs and then they should go together. They should go and set dinner for Mr. Aowen. Dima Neotrazikika was pleased and dragged Guan Ergu's body along with them. Lu Dayton walked along with them, pretending to be one of them, although he thought to himself that he was scared to death and couldn't understand what kind of place he was in. Meanwhile, the guy who hid in the house at 7 Lucky Street was walking and smiling as he watched the romance on his phone. He looked at the message and thought about the fact that you can fall in love in a moment. One should have hurried up and found her very quickly. After all, he only had 1 hour on Sunday to transform from demon to human. When he found himself in front of the right apartment, he opened the door. With the words that he was going to look, he went in. Walking around the apartment a little while, he wondered where his little girl was. Soon he saw the girl in front of him and exclaimed that he had finally found her. Sitting on the bed in front of him was a red-haired girl, wearing a gorgeous combination of a leather dress and stockings. She playfully offered to play exciting games with him. The demon tore off his clothes and declared that he wanted to play, and how to play. After a while he sat sprawled out on the bed and said that she could do a lot of things. He found it very sexy and that's why he never wants to be a dog again. The demon then sniffed and asked in surprise what that smell was. The girl replied that it was a tried and tested trick. After which she stated that there was no shortage of men like him in this world. This girl turned out to be the fox shifter's older sister, Jiao. The demon was extremely surprised and asked what about him. After which, the girl's face began to gradually dim in front of his eyes. And it happened until she completely dissolved into a haze. When the demon opened his eyes, he found himself in an unusual position. It turned out that he was suspended from a tree by his feet upside down, and tied hands, and near him were suspended also other people who were asking for help without stopping. The demon was extremely surprised by his situation and asked in amazement what this place was and why he was here. Then he looked around and was even more surprised. Right in front of him on the throne was a monster in the same pose as Jiao, who was next to him, and near them were other rather small demons. In general, the following picture appeared in front of the demon. In the middle of the field was a cauldron with green potion. Some demons were dragging Guan Ergu's body, another demon was sitting on the throne, and around him were his subjects. A demon girl with green hair and wearing a black dress walked up to the main one, beside whom Jiao was sitting. She bowed and pronounced that she was late, turning to Aowen-san. Well, for that, she has a small gift for him, she said while the demons with Guan Ergu's body crowded behind her. Mr. Aowen nodded his head in satisfaction. After which he pronounced that they had done a good job. He had even had some fun for the evening. After which, he grabbed Jiao's head and turned her towards him. He told her that they were now waiting for her sister to serve the last main course. After all, just by eating it, he could become immortal, the Lord declared, and his eyes lit up red. Meanwhile, the following was happening on the ground. The girl who came to Shangwan Wuzai and Yunyi's dinner was greedily eating the barbecue that Wuzai had prepared. At the same time, she praised her and said that she was a very good cook. However, Shangwan Wuzai herself responded by asking her to eat more slowly so that she wouldn't choke on it. Yunyi gave her a wary look and arrogantly asked if she had come here just to eat. She said that demons couldn't even be hungry anymore, and that the fragrant smell was beckoning to her. Yunyi shrugged his shoulders and said that this thing didn't even taste good, and the girl pointed her tongue at him and said that he had a very low IQ. Soon, a pretty good mountain of emptied skewers grew in front of the girl. She happily thanked Yunyi and Shangwan Wuzai, calling the girl a sister and the guy a stinker. After that, she rummaged in her bag with words to not worry about them. She wasn't going to eat their food for nothing as a thank you, but she could give them the following. The girl handed them 2 bottles and said that it was demon juice that she had made herself. A girl could be this term if she wanted to improve her beauty and charm. Hearing this, Shangwan Wuzai examined the bottle she received with astonishment. Yunyi, who was told by the demon girl that he looked exhausted and drinking this juice would give him a considerable amount of energy, did the same. Shangwan Wuzai unscrewed the bottle and said that it smelled good and had a certain yaya flavor. The demon on the other hand confirmed this and said that she made it her own marvelous liquid as well. After which she giggled and said that it was really nasty, but they should just try it. That demon Jay was the little sister of the fox shapeshifter named Yaya. Meanwhile, Mr. Aoin continued to enjoy the torment of the demons that were suspended and were still begging for mercy. Some of them shouted that they had a wife and children, while others teased them and asked why he hadn't thought of his family before. Even Guan Ergu whimpered. Aoin told Jiao that when all these people were in the cauldron, each of them would get their share. The demon who came last and turned out to be Iwan heard this and shouted to her that although this old demon was definitely a threat to her, but this old man was not a problem for him, so he would save her. Hearing this, Mr. Aoin ordered to close his dog mouth and throw him first into the cauldron. Ivan was surprised that he knew about his dog origin. Just then a portal opened and another demon girl appeared. Ivan, who had his mouth already closed, thought that another beauty queen had arrived. The girl meanwhile walked over to a tree and beside her was the bound Yunyi. Ivan was surprised to recognize his friend and watched her warily. And the demon declared to Aoin that the light-bearing dragon was now under her control. Aoin-san stood up interestedly and looked at him. After which, he walked over to the guy. Yunyi was tied up and also seemed to be unconscious. Mr. Aoin happily sucked in the air and said that he smelled good. Besides, it seemed like his main dish had finally appeared in front of him. After which, he praised the demon girl and said that it was not a bad job for a smart yaya. After which, Aoin ordered the demon Yanwei to take the light-bearing dragon to be purified. Yanwei agreed and with the help of her little helpers, she began to carry out the order, instructing them to hurry up. Then Yaya took the departing Aoin by his jacket and asked him to wait. She then told him that the condition of their deal was that she would bring the light-bearing dragon. Therefore, she asked him to now bring all the people back. Aoin replied not to worry, he wasn't going to cheat her. Yaya replied that since that's the case, he should bring everyone back to Happiness Street. And Aoin's reply threw her off by hitting her hard. Seeing this, Juju was horrified. Then rushed to her aid. And Mr. Aoin was completely furious and asked, did she really just dare to order him around? Yaya replied that he had made them a promise as long as she helped him. But Aoin interrupted her and asked, did they really think they were capable of making conditions on him? After which he laughed and remarked that it was very silly. Yaya and Jiu-Jitsu sat with their heads down. And Yaya had to agree that it was rather silly. After all, he was Mr. Aoin himself. Previously, in their forest of happiness, life was boiling everywhere. The forest was full of greenery and beasts. Back then though, the passage between the human and demon worlds was still sealed, so both sides lived in peace and harmony. Until one day, 2 years ago, a wounded and dying Awin passed through the entrance from the human world into the Forest of Happiness. Upon seeing him, the great elder of the Forest of Happiness Immortal Toad picked up the dying man. Therefore, when Awin opened his eyes, he felt intense pain. The pain made him scream at the top of his voice, but the Immortal Toad said that he knew how much pain he was in, but he needed to bear with it a little longer. And the benevolent Immortal Toad really did his best to save Aowen. After his healing manipulations, the guy came out all bandaged up, but looking quite cheerful. At first, all the beasts looked at him with pity and some wariness. But they soon became friends with him and helped Awin join their large family. Soon Aowen regained his full health. On the day of Aowen's parting with Aowen, the great elder gave a great feast in honor of his send-off. At a very richly set table were gathered almost all the inhabitants of the Forest of Happiness. And the elder told the lad that he could stay in their Forest of Happiness if he wanted, for they hadn't had a new demon for a long time. Awin sipped from his glass and nodded in satisfaction. He said that he really liked this place. After which, he suddenly grabbed the elder by the throat. Awin pulled his toad intending to tear him to pieces. At this, he told the Immortal Toad that he intended to stay here forever. At this, the elder had already coughed up blood and rolled his eyes. Everyone around him stirred and watched in horror. Aowen had done this in order to obtain the Eternal Flame ability, and so, he had consumed his benefactor, the Immortal Toad. After Aowen's massacre of the elder, everything around him turned pink. The beast suddenly turned to the boy, curious as to why he had done it and why he had dared to fight the great elder. Meanwhile, Awin was transformed and became much stronger and muscular. He regained his strength and became exceptionally strong, so much so that the others could not match him. Many people tried to fight him, but they all ended up dead. Thus that night, the farewell banquet turned into the blood banquet. In the following months, Awin actively began to kill and devour the demons of the Forest of Happiness. In doing so, he used violence to establish his dominance. And those demons who disobeyed him were killed by him. Or instead of dying, Aowen turned them into dried-up trees. Two sisters, Jiojio and Yaya, also found themselves in the midst of the epicenter of events. Yaya was extremely determined to kill Aowen, but to prevent her from doing so, her older sister tied her up. She reassured her and said that they just couldn't handle him, because Aowen now had the powers of both a great elder and a father. He was a god. But Yaya didn't want to agree with her and screamed that this bastard had killed all of their loved ones. Should they really kneel before their enemy after all this? And her sister explained to her that he was powerful, cruel and cold-blooded, so all the little demons could only compromise with him. Besides, Jiojio kept saying, if they die, they will have no chance to rebuild this place later. There will be no chance to save everyone else. They must endure. Meanwhile, Aowen's troops were continuously being replenished, to the point where the Union of the Successful appeared. All of this indicated that no one else was able to stop his ambitions. Just as suddenly, a light-bearing dragon appeared in his path and lost its strength. Awin realized that if he ate it, he could surpass the gods and thus break through to the next realm. It was a new realm of power that could overturn everything. And while Awin was daydreaming about the possible prospects, Yaya still couldn't calm down and said that she never thought that Awin was capable of keeping his promise. Hearing this, Jiojio whispered to her sister that she was crazy and she better not make Aowen angry. But the girl didn't think of calming down and said that Aowen was originally a villain. After attacking the elder, he forgot about goodness and despised his duty. After which, she spat out right in his face that he was a shameless animal. Hearing this, Awin reached out and grabbed her by the throat. Without touching the girl, he lifted Yaya in the air and roared that no one had ever spoken to him like this before. After which he stated that they should not forget that he was the one who had saved their cheap lives in his time. Therefore, they would be his doggies for the rest of their lives, and it would be best for them to realize that. Yaya wheezed and coughed, unable to break free. That's when Jiojitsu begged him to let Yaya go or else she would die if all this continued. Actually, Yaya didn't mean to hurt him and she asks to keep her life. Besides, she will apologize to him properly. Aoin surprisingly easily complied with her request and actually let Yaya go. In doing so, he told Yaya that she should learn from her sister, but she was lucky as today was the great day when he would become immortal from a god, so he didn't want to get his hands dirty on a cheapskate like her. So be it, he'll give her one last chance, but he hopes she realized how she should talk to him. Juju sat down beside the beaten Yaya and told her that if she doesn't want her sister to say something like that again, then stop setting her up, but they have to survive first. Yaya replied that her sister shouldn't worry, she knows what she needs to do. After that, she turned to Aoin and told him that his death hour would soon come, as the person who would deal with him had already arrived. After Yaya's words, Aoin became completely furious. Screaming how dare she speak to him like that, he once again lifted her off the ground with his strength. Only this time, he had already enveloped her with his tentacles. Yaha screamed in pain. And Jojitsu screamed that Yaya didn't really want to say that and asked to let her go again. But Aoin didn't want to listen to her either and demanded to get away from him. He continued to use his power and told Yaya that he was the only one in this world who could not be disobeyed. Then he added that if she had kneeled as willingly as her sister, it would not have come to this. Yaha couldn't say anything and only continued to scream in pain and fear. Aoin continued to actively use his force. But then suddenly something happened that surprised him extremely and very unpleasantly. Jojitsu stared at him intently and at the same time began to use the soul summoning technique. Aoin's grip loosened from surprise and he let go of Yaya, who collapsed to the ground without strength. Yaya raised her head and called out to her sister. But Juju shouted at her to run away, because that freak is right, no one in this world can defeat him. Meanwhile, Aoin was under the influence of her power, but the girl said that she could more or less control him for a while, and as long as that was the case, Yaya should run away. Before she could say anything, Aoin attacked her, coming up from behind. Jojitsu screamed and fell down without being able to stay on her feet. Aoin grabbed her hair and said with fury that he was very disappointed now, because even she had betrayed him. Yaha tried to come to her senses. Aoin was torturing Jojitsu. Next to her was a man with a rope in his hands. Seeing this, Yaya called out to her sister in horror. Aoin satisfiedly said that he did it because Juju apparently wants her sister to see with her own eyes how he will trample her. Therefore, he will now put them face to face. Before Aoin could talk, he was suddenly attacked by a demon, knocking him away from Juju. This monster turned out to be Ivan. He stood right in front of the Lord and told him that he was still a beast after all, because only worthless guys like him were capable of beating up women. Aoin looked at him condescendingly and asked who else he was. Yada looked at Iwan in surprise, and Jojo said that he was that guy pierced ear. Iwan replied that they shouldn't worry, he could see their pain and suffering perfectly well. Then he got cocky and told them not to worry, he would avenge them right now. After that, he threw himself at Aoin while shouting that he was a hellhound pierced ear. However, during the transformation, the guy turned back into a husky. Ivan regretfully realized that an hour had already passed, so he had become human again. In fact, not many people knew, but Ivan pierced ear had the opportunity to transform into an adult human for 1 hour on Sunday. Aoin was furious and said to take that dog and throw him in the cauldron. But Ivan wasn't going to give up and said that they better not mess with him, because he was a hellhound and he wasn't fooling them about it. That's why he's going to beat them to a pulp right now, Ivan shouted and rushed to attack. But his attempts to attack were quickly thwarted by the very axe-wielding executioner who was now dragging the husky by the scruff of the neck away from Aoin and the sisters. Aoin asked Yada condescendingly if this was the husky she had meant when she said he was the one to deal with him. He then laughed and asked the sisters if they were so naive to think that anyone would be able to stand up to him. With those words, he once again encircled Yaya and Jojo with the ropes. After that, he came very close to Jojitsu. Yaya was outraged and demanded that Aoin stay away from her sister. Aoin asked the girl if she remembered how those weaklings from the Forest of Happiness died. And he reminded them that their father tried to stop him, so he killed him. Then their brother secretly gathered an army and tried to challenge him, for which he locked him in a tree, snapped all his ribs, and he burned for all 3 months with eternal fire before he died. That's why the Lord said, looking Yaya straight in the eyes so they don't make the same mistakes. He's going to do the same thing to them sisters. Juju tried to stop him and demanded him not to touch her sister. Aoin only laughed and said that he wanted her to look at her body when he devoured it in one go. But Yaya was not going to give up and once again shouted with rage that he dare not touch her sister. He is a filthy animal. Then they heard footsteps behind them. After that, someone's voice called out to them. Yaya and Juju looked behind Aoin's back in surprise. And the one who came was Uni. He asked who Aoin was here. Mr. Aoin turned around in surprise. And Yaya suddenly shouted at Uni asking him why he took so long to come. She then said that it was indeed Mr. Aoin and asked if he could help her kill that bastard. Uni calmly replied that of course he would, then added that he was invincible after all. A few hours ago, the following happened. While Uni was skeptically looking at the bottle, Wuzai tasted the drink that Jojo had given them and concluded that this demon juice was very tasty. She then asked Yaya that she must be from the union of successful and wrongly looking for the light-bearing dragon. Wuzai drew this conclusion because of her looking at it too much. Uni on the other hand was surprised that someone was probably looking for it. Yaya was surprised that Wuzai was able to notice this and asked her why she wasn't afraid to drink the demon juice then. Isn't she afraid of poison? Wuzai smiled and said that she felt that Yaya was a good girl and besides she could smell the ingredients in the juice. Then Yaya replied that they are pretty good people so they need to get out of here right away. After that, she took out a black bottle and said that in order to prevent others from hunting for the light-bearing dragon, she herself offered to let Aoin take the light-bearing dragon. Although she was originally going to give them black demon juice, however, she ended up replacing the black demon juice with regular demon juice that could hide a bit of their scent. Also, she could only think of one way for the light-bearing dragon to escape from Aoin's clutches. She decided not to let this demon become even stronger under any circumstances. After listening to her, Uni said that since Aoin was looking for the light-bearing dragon, he probably had some knowledge of it. That means he must know what happened to him in the past. Yaya unhesitatingly agreed with these arguments and asked what happened to him. Uni replied that he had lost part of his memory and asked the girl to take him to Aoin. Yaya was horrified and shouted that he had gone mad, for he would eat him. However, Uni was optimistic and said that Aoin would not defeat him. Yaya countered that he had probably never met this demon and therefore had no idea how powerful he had become, having devoured many other demons. After all the demons in the Forest of Happiness had been killed by him, and those who tried to disobey him died horrible deaths. Yaya cried and said in despair. She kept searching for hope but it was getting dimmer and dimmer. However, preventing Aoin from eating the light-bearing dragon and preventing him from becoming an immortal was the last thing she could do for the entire Forest of Happiness. Uni was adamant no matter what and kept asking to be taken to the demon. Yaya was angry and said that she had clearly told him and why didn't he want to listen to her? Did he think he could defeat such a strong Aoin? Now back to the present. When the light-bearing dragon appeared before Aoin and told him that he was not afraid of him because he was invincible. Aoin was surprised and irritated and asked what was the matter. How did Uni end up here? After which, he called out to Yanwei. However, she couldn't come to his rescue as she was lying under the influence from the black demon juice that Yaya had kindly provided for Wuzai to use. Wuzai had previously hidden herself in the spatial gauntlet and entered the happiness forest that way. Then she had used the black demonic juice to put the snakeshifter to sleep. So right now, Wuzai was now sitting in front of the demon girl Yanwei, thinking about what the snakeshifter soup could be like. Meanwhile, Yaya shouted out that Uni had promised her earlier and should now help finish off Aoin. Hearing this, Aoin remarked that it seems like they have been conspiring for a long time. However, he can't believe that Yaya believes the light-bearing dragon. After all, he is a loser who can't even walk. He's not the same as he used to be. Then Uni demanded Aoin to tell him what happened to him. Aowen laughed and said that since his own memory was lost, he had come here and thus trapped himself. To kill a scum like him, he wouldn't even need to do anything, laughed Demon Aowen. With those words, he rushed to attack UNI, directing a powerful energy at him. However, UNI was able to stop him literally in front of his nose. After which, he used his energy and threw Aowen away from him, preventing him from hurting himself. UNI exhaled in relief and thought that he had only released energy for 5 minutes last time, and so the side effects hadn't completely gone away yet. Aowen's demon subjects, the 3 swift rooster kings, came to marvel at such a battle. Noticing this, Aowen called them for help, saying that the strength he had given them was more than enough to deal with this guy. He ordered them to crush their last hope once and for all. The roosters immediately rushed to carry out the order. But UNI didn't seem to be the least bit intimidated by this. His strength of energy was enough to repel the attack. Thus, Mr. Aowen and his demons soared upwards like pieces of paper. After which, the roosters fell to the ground. They were completely scorched. UNI decided to take advantage with the removal of the restriction. This time, he decided to save some energy, reasoning that a minute would be enough to deal with Aowen. Looking at the way UNI dealt with Aowen, Yaha thought with admiration that he was very strong. And Aowen remarked that there was no surprise that UNI was able to kill the Dark King of the Eternal Tribe. It turns out that he has a blade that suppresses demons. After which, he summoned his next demon nicknamed One-Eyed Bull. At the same minute, a huge demon began to appear from the ground. It was built athletically and had only one eye in the middle of its forehead. It was truly a great demon under Aowen's leadership. Aowen laughed and asked UNI what was now wrong with his demon-suppressing blade, for he was now nothing more than a mere mortal. After all, the One-Eyed Bull is his strongest deputy and he can have a bloodbath here. The One-Eyed Bull roared and let out a multitude of heads. Aowen declared that he is his sharpest blade, he is the strongest creature besides him, so UNI has nothing left but to meet his death face to face. After that, the demon started to approach UNI. The food for the One-Eyed Bull is energy. Everyone who was bitten by the One-Eyed Bull died a horrible death. Aowen happily painted the prospects that UNI had in front of him. He explained to him that One-Eyed Bull would leisurely completely suck the energy and flesh out of him. Therefore, the more energy it had, the stronger the monster would become. Meanwhile, the monster got down to business and began to suck the energy out of the light-bearing dragon. He absorbed the energy for a while. After that, he exclaimed with pleasure that he hadn't eaten such delicious energy for a long time, so he would completely suck it out of UNI. But suddenly, strange things started to happen to the One-Eyed Bull. He suddenly began to increase in size. This happened until it looked like a fat man. Aowen worriedly observed what was happening. It turned out that this energy was too enormous and was filling up the One-Eyed Bull too quickly. After which, it was bloated to the point where it simply exploded. Aowen shouted his name at the top of his voice as he watched in horror. All that was left of the One-Eyed Bull was a small head. UNI was standing there unharmed in the middle of the demon's remains. Aowen became angry and said that he had had enough of this nonsense. Deciding that he would have to do it all by himself, he used his energy. However, UNI was able to fend off the attack not without difficulty. At first, Aowen thought that he had already defeated UNI and was already rejoicing. But he was soon surprised to find UNI alive and resisting with his energy. Aowen wondered how a mere mortal could possess such powerful energy. And UNI said that he had 25 seconds to answer his question. So he asked Aowen what he knew about what happened to the light-bearing dragon. Aowen was angered by the tone he used to speak to him. He roared that he hated it when anyone dared to order him around. And gathering all his strength, he rushed to attack again, soaring even higher and faster in the air. But UNI released his energy again and began to repel the attack. Aowen laughed and said that since he had lost his former greatness, how did he still dare to attack him, the Great One? UNI didn't reply anything and started to use the fruits of his energy. In response, Aowen attacked the guy with a huge pink ball. Yaya and Juju watched admiringly. And Juju doubtfully said that this UNI could hardly defeat Aowen. The demon explained that it was the eternity bursting ball and no one had been able to stop it yet. UNI carefully watched the approaching ball. After which, he used his blade. However, it seemed that the blade had passed through the ball, and thus was able to stop it. UNI then swung his blade around with a good swing, and aimed it at the eternity bursting ball. That way, he was able to eliminate it. Aowen watched in horror. Jiu-Jitsu and Yaya were absolutely delighted. Then the haze from the eliminated eternity bursting ball began to dissipate. Aowen coughed and said that UNI had succeeded after all. The master then felt himself starting to lose his strength. And UNI was now standing right beside him. Who said that he still had 10 seconds left? Aowen suddenly told him that he was worthy of being a light-bearing dragon, for even after becoming a mere mortal, he had skills. However, as it is, this battle has taken away most of his energy, and those little people think that he has already dissipated. Hearing this, UNI asked who those they were. Aowen asked, wondering if he was really interested, although he was actually just stalling for time. Therefore, when 10 seconds had elapsed, Aowen was able to reconnect with UNI, telling him that his 1-minute time limit had already expired and now he was nothing again. Aowen laughed. UNI tried to use his energy, but there was no energy left at all. He tried to do it several times but only succeeded in making him bleed. Aowen took the blade away from him and realized that he was simply borrowing the power of the demon suppression blade. Without it, he was just a simple ordinary material. Without this blade, he is nothing, Aowen declared to him. UNI felt very bad and from her last strength, she demanded for the blade to be returned to him. To this, Aowen stated that he was now just a loser who was down to earth, so it would be wasteful of him to leave this precious blade in his hands. And he would now become the strongest god and would be the only one in this world who could play everything and everyone from above. Yaya was completely overwhelmed and couldn't believe what was happening. Juju replied to her that there was no way out, it was over. She then told her sister to get out of here and she would detain Aowen with all her might. Yaya disagreed with her decision and demanded to untie her sooner. But Juju replied her that she was their last hope, to do everything possible to protect her. That's when Aowen noticed them and told them to take their time to leave. He was just about to use them to unseal his new blade. Aowen started trying to apply the blade. This was soon noticed by Ivan, who was watching everything happening from the cauldron. He was completely perplexed when he saw that the blade was now in Aowen's hands. Husky quickly realized that the demon suppression blade had left UNI. He was shocked that the demon thought that UNI was borrowing the power of the demon suppression blade. Since Uni's demon suppression blade was not at all meant to suppress them as demons themselves. And it was meant to suppress the demon within himself, killing his soul. Aowen watched in amazement as the blade began to suddenly take on a life of its own. And Ivan realized that UNI had now completely thrown off his shackles. Indeed, in the next moment, they heard footsteps and everything around them was illuminated by a bright light. The light-bearing dragon appeared before them in all its glory. He had indeed returned, only now, he was even more powerful. So, UNI moved and after he descended to the ground even cracked under his soles.